Adrian is a scientist. We often talk about in government what is missing, and there is no scientists really. I mean, we very few that get elected into office as scientists. So there's a few boxes I think you can check off by supporting Adrian.
You know, I'm a scientist. I was born and raised also in Puerto Rico. I come from a working class family. And so growing up, like many families in our city, in Philadelphia, my story is similar in the way that it is a story about struggle. I don't come from a wealthy or powerful family or a well-connected family, which we know in politics has a huge role, especially in a city like this where things are so entrenched. And so, you know, from the very beginning, my campaign has been about the issues, but it also has been about diversity and representation, because we lack multiple voices that, you know, it so happens that I'm also part of many of these communities. And so, you know, despite the way I grew up and all the struggles, there were two things that were constant throughout my entire life that are very important and are reflected on my platform, which were I always had a roof over my head and I always had a good education. And so two things that are really central to me and my platform and my campaign is fighting to ensure that we have fully funded public schools in the city and that we have a good stock of affordable housing so that everyone in our city has a home. These things are right and we should be fighting and have local elected officials, but elected officials at every level of government fighting to ensure that and looking for those solutions and ways in doing that for everyone. And so, you know, I came to Philly to obtain my PhD in cancer biology. So I am a scientist, now turned politician. I've learned to embrace being a politician. And it's important to me because not only do I bring my healthcare background, I also bring the evidence-based policymaking mentality. For a number of months, I helped out and worked as a policy analyst for a congressional campaign here in Pennsylvania's 5th District for Molly Sheehan, who is also a scientist running for Congress. And a lot of what I did was policy research, looking into specific questions that they had, and then finding the evidence and what's being done out there in the world and how we can implement that here as a state, but also, you know, at the federal level. And so that is truly important. That's why when you look at basically at this point my Facebook and everything else, a really key part of my campaign and my platform is a municipal Green New Deal for Philadelphia. And so my municipal Green New Deal, it's a plan, of course, against climate change, but also it's about economic justice, racial justice, and equity in our city. And it is also a plan for job creation. And when we think about this, right, we not only have to tackle climate change because we know what the science says, we know what's going to happen if we don't do this. The United Nations has warned us, reports are out, and if we continue on the track that we're in, by 2050, parts of the city will be underwater, and by 2080, a third of the city will be underwater. And so we really need to act now. Last night I was at a different event and I was talking to people, and I guess I kind of narrowed it down, and I think the two biggest issues that my generation is going to face will be climate change and automation, and how the economy is moving, and how now we have a lot of computers that actually do jobs that humans can do. And so in everything that we do, we have to address the issues that affect us here locally, such as investing money in our infrastructure so that we don't have potholes everywhere in the city, and taking care of those things, you know, picking up the trash, which is, of course, part of a Green New Deal, but also thinking about the future and being bold as to where we're going and lead in that way. We are seeing other cities in this country leading. Governor Wolf actually announced today a plan for climate change and climate action for the state. And so, you know, Philadelphia can be that, and not only lead in that way, but be very autonomous and lead the entire state. And again, you know, it'll be a power for our economy and what we can do here in Philly. And so with that, you know, the Green New Deal touches on education, on housing and how we're building, on economic justice and how we're building the infrastructure and the systems in place, putting those systems in place so that we can actually afford all of this. I'll leave it at that. And yeah, I'll open it up to any questions that you guys might have. Thank you.
So I guess if you were elected to council, what would be your strategy to learning the full amount of policy that Philadelphia is kind of in a deficit, really,
right,
on council, in terms of what policies specifically are hurting people in Philadelphia and how to address them?
And so we need to make sure that we're investing in enforcement, that the agencies that we have that are supposed to regulate these processes have the capability and the personnel to actually be able to create these laws or enforce these laws. In terms of me, myself, and learning, right? Like that's literally what I've been doing my entire career, right? I've been, my career from the cancer research perspective has always been aimed or targeted at answering one question, and it is, how do we cure cancer? That's huge, right? It's one of the hardest questions that we face, and I truly believe so, that humans have ever faced, is how do we cure this disease? And so a lot of what we do is not only study the issue, right, is we don't give up when we're trying to find solutions, is we bring in the people, right? And it is impossible to enact solutions without bringing the communities as well, the communities that are affected. And I do believe, in things like redlining, that is still current. It's happening here in Philly. And so we need not only the enforcement side, but we need to create sensible policies as well to prevent all these things from happening. And my job as a city council member will not only be learning about that, but, as part of this grassroots movement, what I always say is this is a people movement, and I am responsible and accountable to the people of Philadelphia. And so, I want to look at the facts, I want to look at the numbers, I want to look at the data, and then enact sensible policies based on that.
As I'm sure you know, Philadelphia's biggest problem tends to be the people running Philadelphia. And there's an unspoken rule in the city of Philadelphia which is called councilmanic prerogative. And councilmanic prerogative allows council members to make pretty much unlimited decisions on land use within their districts. We've seen a lot of really problematic things happen. The most recent one in the news was in the 3rd district with Janie Blackwell taking land from a developer and literally just giving it to another developer. Are you, as a candidate now, and then as someone who's going to have to work next to people who may be reelected, who are doing some of these things, are you someone who's willing to speak out during these sessions? Because this is something that has to be voted on.
Right.
And a lot of times what happens is, because it's the council district, they just defer to the council member. So if the council member wants to do something, all the at-large, all the council district members would vote for it. You as an elected council member, would you challenge some of these? Would you
Absolutely.
look into it?
Absolutely. I mean, there's 17 members in city council, right? And we have to make sure that whatever's happening in each district, everyone's taking a look and that it's actually fair, period. And that's a problem because for councilmanic prerogative, which does everyone know how councilmanic prerogative work in the city? I know a lot of people, kind of. So the first thing is in Philadelphia City Council, to get anything done, you need 9 votes or 9 council members to vote. With councilmanic prerogative is this unspoken rule that each district council member has a say of how the land is going to be sold and to whom in their own district. And so the unspoken rule comes in because what happens is, because there's 10 district council members, let's say I am the council member for District 2nd, right? District 2, because we're in the 2nd district, and I decide to do X thing, all other 9 district council members then vote with me, under the assumption that when they do the same for their district, that I will agree with whatever they're doing. And so, I think the at-large council members have to be a huge voice, but also we need to elect district council members that are willing to break with this rule as well. Because again, we need to break with this majority of 9 votes in order to get things done. But, I'm not afraid of doing this. I always say, I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to do work. And I am not accountable to other council members, I am accountable to the people of Philadelphia. And, when it comes to things like this, like, that doesn't make sense. It also doesn't follow protocols, and there's just really no reasoning behind it as to why do it. And so to me, that already breaks with so many paradigms that are unacceptable and should be unacceptable. And unless we have voices on council that are willing to speak out against these issues, then we won't be able to start changing things. But yes, absolutely.
I always go on a rant about, and I'll refrain from doing that too much here, but we learn that the World Health Organization projects by the year 2020, which by the way is next year, that depression will be the #1 contributor to the global disease and disability burden. Yet it's one of the least funded areas of research in pretty much all of the health sciences. So there's something at play there that's greater than the evidence, and I think many of us probably know that the answer to that is money. It's the power of money. And we see that no matter how much evidence is supporting certain policies, like green initiatives that you are very outspoken on, there's the sort of corporate influence of money, and more often than not, a lot of people in the position you are currently running for will listen to that overwhelming power of money more so than the actual evidence that we as scientists can appreciate. So can you remark a little more about your stance on campaign finance and the influence of money?
We definitely need massive campaign finance reform in this city, and at all levels of government. And it is important because, again, right, when I talk about my grassroots campaign and who I want to be accountable is, I don't want to be accountable to the money, I want to be accountable to the people. And we know that often enough, it is the money that is driving the conversation and the policies, right? Because it is a way to basically hold politicians and say, like, no, this is what got you elected, and if you don't do this, then you're not going to get this money to get elected next time. And so money is, a way to, it's a really huge way to influence politics, and we need massive campaign finance reform. One of the programs that is actually on my platform is, establishing a municipal public bank here in Philadelphia, so we can keep our taxes and our money here. That way we do away with paying hundreds of millions of dollars to Wall Street banks in interest and whatnot, which actually the city entered in a lawsuit not long ago with 3 of these banks because they were overcharging us in interest. So now we have to spend on lawyers to get back some money that they're taking away from us. That's not okay. And then also, another really good policy that I have on my platform as well is establishing a democracy voucher, similar to what Seattle is doing. So, public financing of elections so that the people in the city have a say of, who they want to see elected and who they want to give money. But basically this program, what it does in Seattle is every person in Seattle that signs up for it, that is a voter in Seattle, gets 4 vouchers of $25. And so that gives people the freedom, including communities that don't have the wealth to be able to contribute to campaigns, the opportunity to give these vouchers to candidates specifically. And often, especially what you see from in Seattle, for example, Sean Scott, who is a democratic socialist, who doesn't take any corporate money, is leading in donations from the democracy voucher. And so it's a different kind of, funding for these campaigns, and for a way for us to do away with that influence that big money has.
You are a cancer researcher and
Yes.
scientist, which I think is amazing, but you're also a democratic socialist.
I am.
And you're also a millennial.
I am.
And I think that's absolutely amazing, but I'd love to know more about how you plan on bringing democratic socialist ideals to city council.
3 things that are a key is education, housing, and healthcare are a human right? And I mentioned that when I was giving my speech earlier, is that those 3 things, we should always have elected officials that are willing to fight to ensure that. And so, I have a really bold and aggressive plan for affordable housing in this city, and it touches everything from zoning to evictions and how they're handled, and good cause eviction legislation, to rent control for renters, but also restructuring OPA, the way we reassess land value, and how we create protections for especially long-term homeowners that are subsidizing the 10-year tax abatement which is money that our schools aren't seeing, and so that also goes into the education platform. Money that our schools aren't seeing, and then money that especially long-term homeowners are subsidizing and paying for. And we've seen that with land value assessments going up every year for the last 2 years, 30% consistently. I like to think of myself as a little of a troublemaker in that way. And I think that we need that energy. It's new energy. It's also someone who's willing to change the conversations. And we've seen officials, we've seen a congresswoman do it in DC, right? And if I'm, referencing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I think we need that energy here in Philly, is to make sure that the people that I'm working with are also being held accountable, but to have also a voice on council that not only has a voice, has the power of creating legislation and also the power of voting on legislation, right? To have that person and have that on city council. And so, that's what I really want to bring, that not only as a millennial, but also as a scientist and as a democratic socialist, and also as an openly out man. It's a very different mentalities that are all together, and well connected. And to me, it's about starting to talk about a transfer of wealth and making sure that the corporations in the city are paying their fair share, making sure that these giant nonprofits that we have are paying their share to the city, and then that we're using that money for resources for our neighborhoods and our communities.
In 2020, the police contract is back up for negotiation. It's not really a negotiation, it's more conversation. But we've had a huge impact with bringing Krasner into the DA's office, of reforming really important things around criminal justice. We've seen a lot of resistance from the police force. There doesn't ever seem to be any conversations prior to the negotiation on the council side.
Right.
Is that something that you would be willing to make an issue so that maybe there's
Definitely.
a hearing, we can actually
Come on in, guys.
talk about this? I'm always kind of flabbergasted. The last one kind of came and went and no one asked any questions, and we had just elected Krasner, and so I would like to see, as someone who isn't afraid to be a rebel rouser, I would like to see some rebel rousing around the police contract.
Definitely. I mean, one of my main policy planks is criminal justice reform. So there is a lot that the district attorney, Larry Krasner, has been doing and can do. But there's also a lot more that we can do from the legislative side. And so when it comes to the contract negotiation, if I'm on city council, but even as a constituent, as a citizen of this city, I want to know what they're negotiating and what's happening. So we need to be having, public, these negotiations have to be open to the public, to Philadelphians, where Philadelphians can actually put input. And we need to do that not only when it comes to this, but also at all levels of government, is that the public has a say and has participation. We need a participatory democracy in our city. And then from the legislative side, talking about banning cash bail practices and plea mills, ending stop and frisk in our city, and really talking about criminal justice reform in a way that moves us away from the over-policing and criminalizing of Black and brown communities, and more about what is security in our city, in our cities, and in our different neighborhoods. And definitely, I mean, this is something that we've talked about. We know the Inquirer also published an article recently that the main issue that people are concerned about in Philly is violence and crime. And I'm glad that you brought it up, because at most of the forums that we go to, it's not being brought up. And we don't talk enough about criminal justice reform and how these practices and the laws that we have in place are racist and lead to a ridiculously high incarceration rate for Black and brown people in this city. I am pro the safe injection site or safe consumption sites. I think that this is part of a healthcare platform. When we talk about safe consumption sites, it's not a place where people go to just consume drugs. It's a place where there's medical professionals and mental health professionals, right? It has to be coupled with resources in those terms as well, so that we can work on rehabilitating populations, right? And specifically the population that suffers from substance abuse disorder, because we are losing way too many lives, and no life in the city should be dispensable, and we have to, that is extremely important. I also say this as someone who has also lost family members due to the opioid epidemic, right? Like, it is a healthcare issue, not a criminal issue, and we have to make sure that that's happening, that we are doing this, and we need a site. We need a site where people can come in, get rehabilitated. And I also say, not to sound like a broken record, but we need to couple that with job training programs. Because the other problem, right, is if we don't do a comprehensive approach and we're able to rehabilitate people and insert them back into society, if they're not able to get jobs, you feed again into the cycle of poverty. So we really need to break with the cycle of poverty as well when it comes to that. I know some candidates talk about a mobile site that goes all over the city. I know for a fact that those sites, when they're mobile, they're not as effective as they can be. Like, it's good to have mobilization and buses that go into neighborhoods, especially because in the city, right, the opioid epidemic is highly concentrated in North Philly, in the Kensington area, but it is spreading to other parts of the city as well. And South Philly is now the other neighborhood that's being increased, seeing an increase in these cases. And so I think if there's going to be one site, that it should be in an accessible place. And Center City residents are not going to like this, but that's a place where people can actually get to easier, and where there's also healthcare resources surrounding them. And that's what we should be thinking about. But I think that we need more than one, and that we have to address, and that it is important, although council members don't want it in their district, which is going to be the really important fight, right? And the big thing here is to have it also in the places where there's the most people affected.
Statistically and historically, the way it's worked in other countries, because it's new to America, is you target the problem area, like the area where the drug trafficking is occurring, and you give these people the wraparound services. So I don't think that Kensington is a dumping ground by putting a health clinic in the middle of it. I think that it's good to do that. Should there also be one in Center City? Absolutely. Should there be one in every neighborhood? Absolutely. I fully support them, but I do worry about the language of saying that it's bad, or that because it's good. It's really, really good.
And the science and the factors behind it as well.
I mean, in Portugal, it has been absolutely a phenomenal resource for the public. And I think that people really have this misconception that people are just going to be able to go and legally do drugs there. Most people addicted to drugs do not want to be addicted to drugs. They are addicted, and it's a disease. And the only way to address that disease is with wraparound healthcare services. So I really just want to push that it should be where the issue is, so that these people can get help. Because I have many family members. My graduating class, more than 50% of my graduating class has been affected by the opioid crisis. It's something that ravaged my community, and so I've seen what happens. You lose your family, you lose your friends. You have nowhere to turn. You have no one who trusts you. You have nowhere to go. And if there is not a service that will welcome an addict and say, look, we understand all of this stuff, and we're still willing to accept you. I just think it's really, really important that the communities that are being affected, this is a net benefit. It's not going to draw more people there. It's going to make sure that more people are getting help.
Drug consumption overall lowers, and that we're able to target the homelessness problem as well, that we're able to take people out of the streets. And then, that's why I talk about coupling this with job training programs, so that we can insert people back into society, but with actual opportunities to succeed and thrive and have a life after treatment. Yes.
And I'm in Kensington, and there's a lot of people that don't want it there, but there's also a lot of people that realize that the drugs are there and there are people using there, and it's happening everywhere. And if it means that the kids that are walking to school step over fewer needles, if there are fewer people that you have to call an ambulance on because they're lying in the street, that is something that is a good thing. And I think there's a lot of neighbors that support it, but it's harder to say that you support something like that than to be against it.
Recently, the school district of Philadelphia regained local control of its school board. However, it's an appointed school board. I don't know if City Council has any say in those appointments. Would you be open to some sort of hybrid system that would give City Council a say, or even some directly elected board members by the voters of Philadelphia?
Having a democratically elected school board, because we need to make sure that the people that are there are also community members and that have a say on how their schools are also being run. And I think, a hybrid system could work, but we definitely need to have a voice, and Philadelphians they have the right and they should have the opportunity to vote and decide who they want to see in their school board, like a lot of other school boards around, or even around the city, right, in the suburbs do. So yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.